welcome to Leading with Empathy and Allyship. Here we have deep, real conversations about how we can be more inclusive leaders in our workplaces and communities. I'm Melinda Briana Epler, the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst. And at Change Catalyst, we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, and events. This is a safe space to learn, to build empathy for each other, and to understand tangible actions we can all take to make a difference in each other's lives and in our own lives as well. And so this is a special summer season 4 where I talk about some of our most requested topics and answer any questions you all have from the live audience here. So today is episode 50. We've been doing this for a year. We took a few weeks off here and there, so 50 it is. And we'll be talking about understanding and correcting our biases. We'll talk about what biases are, how they show up in the workplace, some common workplace biases, how to correct them in ourselves, and also some intervention strategies for reducing biases in the workplace. And then we'll also talk about believing versus gaslighting and making sure that we're really showing empathy and presenting empathy as people talk about their own experiences. All right, so thank you so much to First Tech Federal Credit Union for sponsoring this episode. And on screen, we have our ASL interpreters. Thank you to Interpreter Now for our ongoing partnership. We really appreciate them and all they do. This is also being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So if you want to turn on captioning, just go to the bottom of your screen and click closed caption. And then our team is behind the scenes doing amazing work. Juliet, Renzo, Araya, Gigi, and Emily. So they're also in the chat and Q&A. So they're for you. If you have any questions, any technical issues, please ask. And engage with us in the chat. Share what you're learning and thinking during the conversation. This definitely helps me. It helps me considerably to know what's resonating for you, and especially in a solo episode, it's really helpful for me. So appreciate you all sharing your thoughts over the last several episodes. You all have been amazing. So, and you use the Q&A function. For specific questions you want to make sure that I answer. I will spend some time at the end if there are questions. Just spend some time with you all and your questions. All right. So. I'm going to share my slides. All right. A little moment of silence here while I do that. Please continue to introduce yourself. Thank you all. I appreciate you. I see your comment, Madeline. That's awesome to hear. Okay. All right, so as you all know, I'm Melinda Briana Epler. I'm the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst. And to briefly describe myself and the photo on the slide, I'm a white woman with long hair. In the slide, I'm wearing a navy blue long sleeve shirt. Today, I'm wearing a sleeveless light blue shirt, and I have black and white glasses. You can find me on Twitter at Melinda Briana Epler, or Instagram at Change Catalysts. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. And I create inclusive ecosystems using human systems design, storytelling, community building, and behavioral science. And as many of you know, I am an author. I've been thinking about this book, How to Be an Ally, since 2015, really gathering knowledge and research and researching, and then writing it over the last 2.5 years. And finally, it's available for pre-order. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. So I cannot wait for this to be out in the world, helping people become better allies. It includes historical context, frameworks, data, stories, some of my own personal stories, as well as some of the stories people have told me in their own voices, and a whole lot of ways that you can take action. So my publisher is McGraw-Hill, and it will be released on September 14th. I actually just spent the entire weekend and will this coming up weekend making the final edits on the book. So please pre-order it if you're able to. It makes a huge difference in the book's success if there are a lot of pre-orders. So please do share it as well. Share it widely. I appreciate all of you who have already. It's been really helpful, and appreciate you so much. So, and also if you want to order in bulk, just email us at contact@changecatalyst.co. You can buy books for your team, company, or school, for example, and we'll make sure you get a discounted rate there. So. All right, so this episode and the whole summer season of season 4, I'm sharing a little bit of what's in the book to give you some important ways that you can make a difference as an ally in your workplace. Last time we talked about why empathy and allyship matter in the workplace, how they influence diversity, equity, and inclusion, what people want from allies, and also the business case. And we discussed representation and underrepresentation. So people from many different backgrounds are underrepresented and face barriers and discrimination. Women, people who are non-binary, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA+, people with disabilities, veterans, religious minorities, and age too. In tech, specifically in our industry, anybody over 35 is underrepresented, and in many industries this is an issue. In most industries this is an issue. So, and we talked about intersectionality as well, that people can hold more than one of these identities, many of these identities. Someone can actually hold all of these identities, these pieces of their identity, these aspects of identity, and that can compound barriers in opportunity to live, to love, to lead, to thrive. And we also talked about why people are underrepresented from society, historical privilege and oppression into the workplace. Historical privilege and oppression turns into the schools we have access to, the networks that get us jobs or don't, the discrimination we face daily, systemic inequities in hiring, pay, promotion inequity. Even products can be built to unintentionally reinforce inequities and cause inequity. And then personal biases, which we'll spend our time on today. Biases can play a role in hiring, promotion, reviews, who leads, who speaks, how projects are assigned, who gets those stretch assignments, those big breaks in their careers, and then also cultural marginalization as well. That can lead to a lot of things that daily, over time, really wear you down. So how do we solve it? We solve it through allyship. We solve it by working together, one action at a time, one word at a time. We change the way we do things. We change the way we say things. Through a critical mass of allies and advocates, we can create the change that we want to see in our workplaces. So allyship is understanding that imbalance and opportunity, understanding oppression, biases, discrimination, marginalization, inequity, all of these, is understanding all of these and using your power, your privilege, your influence to change it. So today we're talking about doing no harm. And the first piece of that is understanding and correcting our biases. We start by learning and unlearning and relearning, and that's really important. It's a lifelong process. We unlearn what we know about success, opportunity, history, identity, but we don't get stuck in just learning, right? It's really taking action, doing no harm, correcting your biases, recognizing that we have those biases that have been passed on through generations, through families, friends, media, TV, film, culture, and working to correct them, working to understand and correct them. So biases are mental patterns. They're shortcuts that influence our perception about something, someone, or a situation. We learn them from our families, from our friends, from our teachers, media, culture, and we might not be aware of them. And they can perpetuate all of the things we just talked about: oppression, inequity, and marginalization. And because they're learned, though, we can unlearn them. And as allies, we must interrupt them by making them visible, by making them deeply conscious, being deeply conscious about what we say and what we do. It requires effort. It requires time to unlearn and unravel what's been really ingrained in our consciousness for so long. But it does get easier over time. So the more you learn, the more it gets easier. The more you see them, the more you are able to interrupt them. And our biases, they appear in many ways, from small nonverbal cues we give through facial expressions and body language, to assumptions that we make about people when we're hiring or promoting, to the way we design events, physical spaces, the way we give reviews, benefits, the way we design benefit programs, the way we design learning and development programs, mentorship programs, products and services, of course, as well. All of these can have real consequences of whether or not someone succeeds in their career, thrives in their career, gets where they want to in their career, or whether they feel safe or like they belong in the workplace and in the world. So some examples of biases. Due to biases, investors are more likely to invest in attractive men. Attractive people are more likely to be employed, and they're more likely to earn more. Resumes with African-American sounding names receive fewer callbacks. That means that when you're Black, you have to apply to more jobs before you get those interviews. People with disabilities are seen as unhireable. And that has a huge impact on employment rates for people with disabilities. A motherhood penalty and a fatherhood boost results in compensation disparities. Black women are often invisible, where their presence and statements are less likely to be remembered than white peers. Leadership roles are seen as masculine, and there's data that shows all of this. There's research that shows all of this. We'll share some of those in our follow-up to this and on our website. And then lastly, applicants with women-sounding names are rated lower for competence, for hireability, for mentoring potential. So biases can influence how we see and interact with each other, both inside and outside the office as well. Walking into stores and restaurants with my husband, who's Black, I see women holding their purses tighter. I see security guards following him through the store. I see cashiers looking harder to be sure he hasn't stuck anything in his pockets. He's a successful entrepreneur and he's a leader in his field. And though to be clear, no one should be treated as a criminal because of the color of their skin. He doesn't get to just walk into a room. He walks into a room and has to take into account how his skin color affects people. My husband is also my co-founder. And when we're in important partnership meetings, often people assume he's the CEO because he's a man. Or the reverse, they see him, they don't even talk to him because they see him as my assistant. So our biases can be so quick and mostly unintentional in the results, what comes out from them. Yet they can harm someone's sense of self-worth, safety, respect, and belonging. They can cause unintentional harm. And we need to learn about them in order to intentionally disrupt them. So we'll talk about a few biases here today. I just want to mention also the limitations of focusing on biases and exclusively on biases. A lot of companies spend a lot of time on unconscious bias training or implicit bias training. So I just want to be really clear that unconscious bias training can help you learn about biases. Good training can also give you alternatives and ways to interrupt those biases, both through personal and systemic interventions. Unconscious bias training cannot magically change behavior and culture on its own. It's not a one-stop solution. So unconscious bias training, it can help you learn about your individual biases, but it does not change diversity, equity, and inclusion across your workplace very much. It's the beginning. You have to do a lot more work to really create change. So about 50% of our inbound client inquiries at Change Catalyst are from companies who did unconscious bias training and didn't create the change they wanted. They've usually spent a huge budget on it, on rolling it out across the organization, and then employees can get angry that nothing is changing, or fatigued, ready to move on from diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's a lot of work, a lot of budget, and not a lot of gain. So training needs to go further, needs to go deeper. It needs to be systemic. It needs to be over time. A 2019 study analyzed evidence from 492 other studies on unconscious bias training interventions, and it found, quote, little evidence showing that a change in implicit measures will result in changes for explicit measures of behavior. So change internally doesn't create change externally, essentially. Our work and the work of many of my colleagues have confirmed this, that while it can help people learn, it doesn't consistently change behavior. So people need the tools to take action once they've learned about biases. So it's not enough just to do unconscious bias training. It can be powerful, but it needs to include allyship training, advocacy training, and the specific departmental training, leadership training, really going deeper and continuing forth with the learning and the growth and the action. Many of you probably remember back in 2017, there was a very public instance of how unconscious bias training can go wrong. When James Damore attended unconscious bias training at Google, he was so turned off by it that he wrote a 10-page manifesto professing that unconscious bias training and diversity, equity, inclusion are discriminatory. And he said, compassion for the weak. He said we should have respect for the strong and not lower the bar, which many of us have heard before, because he said women are inherently and biologically inferior to men when it comes to engineering roles. That manifesto was circulated throughout the company and caused a lot of division and trauma at Google. Eventually, Google fired Damore for advancing harmful stereotypes. And because he was a manager and obviously very harmful, that can be very harmful. And he went on to be a public figure speaking about against diversity, equity, inclusion on conservative talk shows. So if you do unconscious bias training, a few things to keep in mind. Don't make it mandatory. Accompany it with training that teaches people how to change their behavior. Reward and hold people accountable for changing that behavior. Develop processes that help people reduce that behavior, reduce biases in decision-making, lots of processes that you can put into place. And above all, make sure that you're investing more time and resources into reducing systemic inequities. Go beyond training as well. And so the other limitation here that I want to talk about is there's a lot of focus on technology fixing biases. There are apps available for hiring teams that can remove names, education, other common indicators that typically provoke bias, but they don't fundamentally fix the problem. They don't fundamentally correct it. Humanizing and empathizing are one of the keys to reducing our personal biases. And we need to actually actively reduce our own biases, because when we rely on technology to correct our biases, it's not correcting any behavior. It's not correcting any fundamental underlying biases. They're still going to come out in other ways. And the technology, saying technology is going to fix it is actually normalizing biases. It's saying it's okay to have biases. Technology is just going to fix it. Use technology around biases with caution, and use them to teach you about your biases and so that you can unlearn them. The other thing is that a lot of applications are still new and they still have biases within them themselves. They're still created by humans. People are still learning. So that's another thing to think about. And then, of course, there's lots of examples out there of when artificial intelligence becomes a part of it, that also can cause harm because historical data can be biased. So work to change behaviors, work to fundamentally shift cultures, and keep in mind that one technology is not going to fundamentally fix it. Okay. So let's go into some common biases. And I know I kind of said a mouthful there. So please, you all feel free to share what you're thinking about in the chat. And as I talk about the biases, the different types of biases, please share any instances that are coming up for you, anything you can remember about something that hit home for you when that bias came up. So identity bias, bias against or for somebody's gender, race, ethnicity, disability, religion, age, class, caste, political views, geographic origin, body size, thinking style, also against or for parents, immigrants, LGBTQIA+, veterans, people who've been incarcerated, etc. Across lots of different aspects of identity. Yeah, Denise, I think you just sent it to panelists, but I hope it's okay to read your chat. I think the most important thing to remember is that in this work is that you must do and cannot assign to someone else or some software to do it for you. Absolutely. And Erica says also, spaces need to be created where people can honestly share what they feel and think. Yeah, absolutely. We talked about psychological safety a bit last time. That's so important, and creating these safe spaces to talk about the real issues, and education and sensitizing can then flow from this. Absolutely. Yeah. So a few examples of identity bias in the workplace: assigning admin tasks to women, not interviewing somebody with a disability because you don't think that they will perform well. It happens a lot. Believing people with a particular gender, race, or thinking style are better leaders. When hands are raised at an event or at a meeting, you call on men first. I see this all the time when Q&A happens at an event, at a panel. And it's not intentional. Again, most of these aren't intentional. And that's the key, is to make these visible and learn about them so that we can be more positively intentional. Passing over somebody for promotion who is transgender or non-binary, perhaps because you don't believe that they would excel in customer-facing or management roles. All of these things happen a lot in the workplace. Please feel free to share additional ones that have come up for you or that you've seen in your work. And a lot of you are sending notes to panelists only. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with the whole, with everybody, so panelists and attendees, that would, then we can all kind of learn from you all. I would really appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for sharing. Okay, so similarly, stereotyping, also called perception bias. This is a type of identity bias as well. An assumption and often a derogatory belief about a particular group of people. So examples, assuming someone who's Asian, Indigenous, or Latinx can't speak English well. Assuming Asian people are good at math or engineering, while women who aren't Asian are bad at them. In job performance reviews, describing an assertive woman as aggressive and an assertive man as confident. And believing a Black person is not a good fit for leadership because they're, quote, angry or, quote, overly direct. Can you all think of some other examples of identity bias and stereotyping? Yeah, Amanda says, anyone over 40 will not be able to pick up tech or excel at new things. Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of biases around age in the tech industry and in other industries as well. Madeline says, can we talk about coaching different from allyship and advocacy as an important component of change? Beliefs have to move to action. Leaders can model, but we may all need coaching to learn in real time. Training alone won't get there if not put into practice. Absolutely, 100% agree. We do coaching with leadership around inclusive leadership, and it makes an incredible difference to internalize it, to really reflect and process. And coaching is incredibly powerful. Absolutely agree, Madeline. Karen says new mothers won't want a certain type of job that requires travel. Yeah, Yeah. Layla says, micromanaging the work of people with mental illness or mental disorders because the assumption is that they don't ever have enough concentration. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, I have put some of this in the book actually around assumptions and biases that people make around people with disabilities in particular in the workplace. It's a lot, and it really, it is severe in how it affects long-term career opportunities and short-term career opportunities as well. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. So in-group, out-group bias, also called affinity bias. This is the tendency to warm up to people like you. It often leads to in-group favoritism and out-group discrimination. And in-group could be an identity, school, neighborhood, hometown, sports team, or even type of sport, fraternity or sorority, or some other type of affiliation. Even, workplace, even working at a specific company, there's a lot of affinity bias in the tech industry around Google and Facebook and some of the other larger tech companies that people assume that and warm up to people that have worked at those companies. So just a couple of examples here, taking a chance on someone from your in-group while requiring someone from your out-group to pass tests to prove their skills. It happens a lot in the hiring process, for example, and also in promotions. It happens a lot in promotions too, where, I'm just gonna wait and see kind of how she handles this project, where I know he's gonna be okay, right? Looking for talent in your own networks from different schools and communities that you identify with. When you're looking for diverse talent, when you're looking for people with underrepresented identities to fill your roles, you need to go where they are, meet them where they are. That's not necessarily in your own networks. So expand those networks. When hiring, evaluating for, quote, culture fit or pattern matching to your current team, looking for similar patterns in education, in personality, and other attributes that you think are going to align best with the current in-group for your team. Please feel free to add any additional ones as I kind of move to the next one. Halo effect. This is the tendency to think that everybody about a person is good because you like them. This often combines with affinity bias or in-group bias. Being more likely to warm up to someone like you and thinking out everything about them is good, right? The opposite is the horns effect, where somebody makes a mistake in the past and you believe they are incapable of succeeding in the future. So some examples here, enjoying a colleague's company outside of work and choosing them for a promotion because you have a special connection with them. Someone like you makes a mistake and you brush it off as circumstances, where somebody you don't know as well makes a mistake and you hold them accountable, and you consistently hold them accountable. A brand creates a product you really like and you expect all their products to be good products. Or somebody who is attractive is often perceived as more intelligent, trustworthy, successful, healthy, more confident, just because they're attractive. Or perceived as attractive. Maurice says, something to consider when building a team, if everyone on the team is the same, then only one of you is necessary, right? Right, thank you, Maurice. Yeah. Okay, so confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms pre-existing beliefs or assumptions. So if you have biases, right, you can reinforce biases with confirmation bias, right? Social media algorithms are designed to show us information the platform believes we will like, usually conforming our beliefs and attitudes. And this, there's lots of stuff written, lots of conversations about this. It can make us believe most people have the same beliefs as our own. And it can make it challenging to have constructive conversations about opposing beliefs. Yeah. Also asking one-sided questions to get to get answers that confirm what we want to hear. So this can happen in interviews. It can happen in reference checks. It can happen when we're conducting investigations internally. It can happen in a quality control process where we see only what we want to see. It can happen in interviews and when we're seeking feedback from each other. Please share any other ways that confirmation bias might come up, that halo effect might come up. And moving on to groupthink. So also called a conformity bias or consensus bias, or the bandwagon effect. It has a lot of names, but generally the tendency for people in a group to desire harmony within the group, and therefore find a decision that minimizes conflict rather than a decision that achieves the ideal outcome. This can happen when your workplace lacks psychological safety, which is something we talked about at length in the last episode, where people don't feel like they can take a risk, they can contradict the group. That can have a huge detrimental effect on innovation and decision-making in a workplace culture that's not psychologically safe. Members of the group may not contradict ideas or offer alternatives, and you're just missing out so much. A tragic example of this, it can happen when teams are rushed as well. And so important when you're working with products that involve safety, autonomous cars, other technology that you're trying to roll out, that you might be trying to roll out too fast, that could adversely have a really negative effect and a tragic effect. So in 1986, the NASA team was working so hard together to meet the launch deadline for their Space Shuttle Challenger, that they didn't listen to engineers who warned that there might be a problem based on the outside temperature. And as a sad, tragic consequence, the shuttle disintegrated after flight, killing everybody on board. So really important to make sure that you're opening up to different points of view, that you're making that safe, psychologically safe environment for that to happen. Yeah, reading Madeline's comment here, affinity brings a value, but end result needs to be diversity, equity, and inclusion. An example, a college affiliation may be the same, but the people and their profiles can be different. So as long as the net effect is not exclusionary and remains open to new group members. Yeah. I think it's really important to rethink and open up your in-group to more people than we normally do, and really think differently there. Okay, another one, self-licensing. So also called self-bargaining. This is the tendency to do one good thing and feel you're off the hook for doing more good things, and or that you have license to do something less good. So if you're working to stay fit and healthy, for example, and you eat an apple for lunch, and then decide it's okay to eat a donut or two in the evening, but it actually doesn't work that way, right? Recently, this has come out in so many different ways over the last year after George Floyd was murdered. A company puts out a social justice statement in support of a group, donates money to a nonprofit, but doesn't actually change their habits that are harmful to that same group. So changing those harmful habits of inequitable hiring, products that perpetuate stereotypes, marketing and messaging, and other ways that internally they are causing harm. Also having one Black friend and still making racist comments, or mentoring one woman while harassing or bullying other women. Performative allyship in general can be a form of self-licensing as well, where you say you care, you put out a statement, you share a black square on Instagram, and you kind of think that that's all you need to do, and you take license to not really do anything else at all. Yeah. So then anchoring is another. When your perception relies heavily on the first piece of information that you learned about a person. So in salary negotiations, this is a great example where you might anchor to somebody's previous salary and then value them with this number in mind. Like you're anchored into how other people have paid them, right? But we know that people with underrepresented identities are underpaid. So it can perpetuate inequity, it can perpetuate stereotypes, it can perpetuate keeping somebody down in their career. Yeah, Karen says, I haven't heard of the term self-licensing before. Before this, I did I've been doing work around behavior change for a very long time and studied a lot of behavior science, and it comes up a lot in public safety campaigns and environmental campaigns as well, because where people will say, well, I recycle, so I'm going to go ahead and buy an SUV, for just as another example. That's the same kind of thing. It comes up a lot. So examples of anchoring also, you perceive somebody by how they're introduced. So if somebody was introduced with a bias, in a biased way, you can actually take on that bias about them as well. Something you learn about somebody via social media, you anchor into that and don't let them become who they are now. So let go of those anchors. Negativity bias is something that I often struggle with, actually. This is the big one for me. The tendency to recall negative or unpleasant memories more readily than positive ones. A lot of people have this. So it can come out in receiving a mostly good performance review, but lingering on the one or two pieces of negative feedback, which can exacerbate feelings of imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough, that I don't feel experienced enough, even when I have all of this experience. I have, years and years of experience, and having a great day collaborating with colleagues and then experiencing a microaggression that significantly affects the rest of the day. And microaggressions are trauma, and when we we can continue to sit with them and forget the good as well, and the good is important too. So if someone has a bad first impression, we may continuously recall that impression, despite more positive interactions since then. So we still linger on that one negative impression that somebody made in that very first meeting. Does this resonate for you? Have you had negativity bias in your life? Yeah. Lots of yeses, absolutely, a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, status quo bias. Status quo bias, also called loss aversion bias. It's a preference for things staying the same. So a change is weighed against the perceived loss of giving up the status quo. System justification bias actually goes further. So you're defending the systemic or the cultural status quo, even when it's unfair or unjust. And we have seen that a lot over the last year, over the last several years, where people have system justification bias anchored in the status quo, even though it is unfair or unjust. Yeah, Michelle says, words to avoid. That's how we've always done it. So examples of status quo bias: having good camaraderie on the team and weighing a new hire against whether they play well with the team, whether they'd be a fit for the team, a culture fit for the team. Being comfortable with your own leadership style and being reluctant to change your microaggressions or become a more inclusive leader, because it could change how you lead. It could change, it could mess things up for you in some way. I do see that in coaching that we just talked about. Believing a business is doing well, and that your business is doing well, and that changing how you do things, like increasing diversity, is an unwanted risk. And this does come up a lot in startups, in particular, the startup environment in particular. Just world bias, and I just have a couple more here. Just world bias is the tendency to believe that the world is inherently just and that actions have predictable and appropriate consequences. Yeah, this is the world we all want to live in. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. So it shows up in the belief of a meritocracy, that people achieve success based on effort, talent, and ability alone. It may take someone with just world bias longer to come to terms with unfairness, injustice, and inequity because they believe that that's not true. And inherently, and as a result, not inherently, but instinctually. And as a result, someone might blame a victim of injustice. They might deny the need or validity of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Or like James Damore might have had just world bias, right? Or even deny major historical injustices. And we do see some of that now as well, right? Yeah. And then experienced regret bias is the last one we'll talk about. And this is also called choice switching. When a good decision leads to a bad outcome, it can lead you to decide against the good decision next time. So kind of once bitten, twice shy. This plays out in the workplace when companies are just starting to work on diversity, and I won't say that they're necessarily working on inclusion or equity yet. They're just starting to work on diversity, and they have a diversity hire that just doesn't work out. A diversity hire, I'm saying in quotes, by the way, because you should not use those terms when describing anyone. So they have a hire that doesn't work out, and then the recruiter, the team, or even the company, the leadership is afraid to hire more people with underrepresented identities, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? When you think about it, if everyone with an underrepresented identity is the same, a monolith, no. And you know, the part of the problem there probably is that they haven't changed the culture yet. So another example, you promote one woman into a leadership role who doesn't succeed in that role, and you come to the conclusion that women just weren't meant for that role. So lots of other biases come up in the workplace, but here are some to kind of think about. So I want to switch to interrupting biases because that's so important. Just kind of lingering on one chat here, Justin says status quo bias. I hear that a lot in healthcare. Bad habits passed down to practitioners from unchecked personal practices. Docs who insist on not being questioned when asked, how do we know this change will work? And my response is usually something like, well, we know what we're doing doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Justin, for sharing that. Okay, so interrupting biases. It's hard. I will say it takes 0.1 seconds to make a first impression. So it's a rapid judgment, which was essential when we needed those instincts for survival thousands of years ago, less helpful now, when it can actually lead to incorrect assumptions and biases about people. So the speed is very rapid and we can't stop it in the moment necessarily, but we can do some things to interrupt our biases before they happen or while they're happening, or after they happen as well. So self-regulation is a big one for all of us. And it just means taking a little bit more time before you make a decision, before you say something, to really check in with your intuition. It can happen, biases can happen in a time crunch especially, but it happens to us all, and we just need to take a little extra time, and it will make a big difference. So pause. Take a breath, step back, ask yourself, what have I learned about biases that I can apply to this situation? Then become aware of your intuition. How am I showing up in this moment? What is my intention telling me right now about how to approach the situation? Really check in with that intuition, and then ask yourself why. Why am I thinking about approaching the situation this way? Why am I thinking about this person this way? What assumptions am I making? And then acknowledge any biases and interrupt them. How might biases be influencing your approach? And if you can put a name to those biases, that can make a difference as well. And then reframe them in a less biased way. Reframe your response, reframe how you act. And you might have to ask yourself what other things you need to do or learn so that you can have a less biased approach. How can data help you make a more informed choice? Can I put together a diverse team to create a more diverse solution? And once you have that less biased solution, how can I test that, right? And then respond in that inclusive way. Am I using inclusive verbal language as well as body language? Am I approaching people in situations with empathy? Am I modeling a growth mindset, which we've talked about before? I may do it again in the next coming episodes. And then reflect, forgive yourself, and improve. Forgive yourself for biases that you had. You're working on them, keep moving forward, and work to improve them. And reflect, did the outcome feel more inclusive? Are there ways that I can make future decisions that are even more inclusive, that are less biased? Okay, so that's kind of the individual work. And then there's also some work that we can do to counter biases in the workplace. Pause, humanize, and empathize, kind of this self-regulation, and practice this on your team, work with your team to do this as well. How can you all kind of pause, reflect, make sure you're making decisions in an inclusive way, in an unbiased way. And then prime yourself and your team as well. You can do this before making a decision. So be aware of biases before you go into a meeting, before you embark on a project. If you're about to interview a candidate, remind everyone beforehand that you value diversity of experience and to be aware of your biases in that moment. If you're working on a project together, remind everybody up front that you want to build a truly inclusive and equitable solution, and ask everyone to keep this in mind, to keep thinking about it as you go through the process. And then also normalizing and acknowledging the countering of biases on your team, in your workplace. You can do this by modeling it yourself. When you catch yourself making a biased statement, talk openly about it and share how you're going to counter it. You can also develop team norms to hold each other accountable for checking your biases, asking for feedback, welcoming feedback, questioning when biases are showing up, where biases might show up, and then supporting each other in that process, in that learning process. That, again, you have to create that psychologically safe environment that we talked about in the last episode. You can also create processes and system interventions to counter biases and hold yourselves accountable. So a big thing here is, biases show up so much in team meetings. So have good team meeting processes that are inclusive and that minimize biases. The same for interviews, for reference checks, for any interactions where there's something at stake in somebody's career. How can you create a process that ensures that fewer biases, that you can really reduce those biases? And then offer formal and informal learning opportunities as well. Training, allyship, empathy, inclusive leadership training, all can make a difference. Think about it again for the long term. How can you build behavior change, build culture change over time? And then develop those informal learning opportunities as well. How can you build in formal, informal events, ways for people to learn about each other, which makes a huge difference as well in reducing biases and reducing that in-group, out-group bias. Just a few things there, and please chime in if you have other ideas for sure. And then one more thing I just want to talk about briefly is believing versus gaslighting. You've all heard me talk about my own experience as an executive in a non-inclusive environment. And if you haven't heard about it, go back and listen to one of my previous episodes. We'll link to that in the website for this episode. So here, a quick example of gaslighting. After a C-suite meeting I was in, where I was showing my colleagues our high turnover rates and lower engagement numbers for women in our firm. It was like a week after I'd informally brought up the issue to the team for the first time. So my goal was to discuss the data together so we could address it and we could still become a great firm for women, which was one of our business goals, one of our top business goals. So as we came out of the meeting after presenting this data, a colleague of mine in the C-suite whisked me over to a corner of the room, like physically whisked me over to the corner of the room and said, "You've got to stop with this women thing." He told me it was all in my head, even though I had literally just finished showing them it was in the data. And he said it was ridiculous to stop discussing it and to just suck it up. It actually hit me really hard. He was telling me that the problem wasn't with me. The problem was with me, sorry. He was telling me the problem was with me and it was not with the way I was being treated, nor the way other women were being treated in the company. Yeah, it can hit you very significantly. It changed my behavior, no question. It changed how I showed up. And gaslighting in the workplace, it can be conscious or unconscious. And it can take the form of denying, discrediting, minimizing the impact or trauma from inequity, blaming someone for being mistreated or abused, convincing someone experiencing microaggressions and or the people around them that a person's experience is all in their head. It can be very damaging over time and can severely affect somebody's self-esteem and make them question their reality. During extensive gaslighting of women during the Me Too movement, people started using the hashtag #BelieveWomen to counter it. It happens in the medical world as well, where a doctor can minimize, ignore, mistreat, or misdiagnose a patient. So it means we're often not listening with empathy and we haven't been working to value somebody's unique experiences. We might be comparing their experiences to our own and how we might act in a similar situation, but we have to be open to their experience with compassionate empathy, which we talked about last time as well. So lots in here, but you'll hear overly sensitive, dramatic, angry, insecure, not a good culture fit, thin skin, taking it personally, taking it the wrong way. Somebody's too emotional, they're overreacting, reading too much into it. All of these things are a form of gaslighting. So last reminder is that an ally learns, shows empathy, and takes action. We learn to better understand each other. We become aware of unintentional harm we might be causing. We make corrections and we continuously grow as inclusive leaders. And yeah, keep taking action. What action will you take as a result of that? Of learning this? What action will you take? And yeah, Michelle says it's disappointing that data doesn't convince people. Yeah, I will. Heidi asks, how do you think of gaslighting and same or different as minimizing an issue? Gaslighting is kind of the personalization of minimizing an issue. But minimizing an issue, like, for example, systemic racism is gaslighting of an entire group of people, right? Excuse me. Yeah. Okay. I just want to mention one more time. It's available for pre-order, ally.cc/book. And upcoming episodes are focused on recognizing and overcoming microaggressions, which are, they build on biases. It's all kind of interrelated. So excuse me. Yeah, so thank you all for your questions and your thoughts as I went through here. Have a bug in my throat. So biases, that was it. We will add some resources. We'll add some resources in the follow-up of this episode. Thank you again to First Tech Federal Credit Union for their sponsorship. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we will be talking about recognizing and overcoming microaggressions, a 2-part series. In the meantime, there's 49 other episodes now. So if you haven't listened or watched them all, I encourage you to check some of them out. There's some amazing people that we've had on the show, amazing gems, lots of wisdom there. So you can find other episodes at ally.cc. And as an ally, you can actually help me buy the book, of course, but also find this episode on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube and review it, like it, subscribe to it. We could definitely use some more iTunes reviews. So if you happen to be on iTunes, look it up and give us a quick review. That would be very helpful. And then hit the share button as well. Share this with your colleagues too. Thank you all for the work you do. Thank you for joining us each week, every other week in the summer, and then we'll be back in September full time each week. So thank you all, appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.